This presentation aims to provide information and details about the newest Snowtam format and Snowtam provisions as introduced by ICAO. You may have already known and learned from the previous presentation or from the GRF webinar 2 days ago that in the GRF process, there would be an initiation stage in which airport operators assess runway condition and report it by means of a standard format, which is called RCR, to the distributors. At the dissemination or distribution stage, the RCR information is received by AIS, AIM, and if applicable, that would be distributed through a Snowtam. And also ATS will receive RCR information and would provide the major parts of RCR information through ATIS or ATC radio. And at the usage or utilization step, airport operators, pilots, dispatchers would get the information and would assess their impact on airplane performance to decide whether they can safely operate, land, or take off on a specific runway reported through RCR. So the focus of this presentation would be on the distribution stage. And the information received from RCR are disseminated by AIS and or ATS. So in case, I will start from the second one, through ATS only. In case runway is wet and this wet runway is not associated with the treatment or clearing of a snow, slush, ice, or frost, this information could be reported just by ATS on ATIS or radio. And each of them has their own pros and cons. We will get into it later. If runway is wholly or partially contaminated by standing water, snow, slush, ice, or frost, so 5 types is mentioned here, or if the runway is wet and this wetness is associated with the clearing or treatment of a snow, slush, ice, or frost, this would be disseminated through a Snowtam, and ATS is always an alternative means of distribution of up-to-date information through ATIS or radio frequency. And the remaining of the presentation would be focused on a Snowtam mainly. So here you will see some comparison pros and cons of a Snowtam, ATIS, and ATC radio very quickly before we get into the discussions about Snowtam itself. In terms of comprehensiveness of information, a Snowtam would be very comprehensive because it will reflect all the details received through RCR via ATS message, which is called a Snowtam in this case. ATIS has for sure a limitation in terms of length of the message, so parts of RCR information which are more major would be included in the ATIS information, and ATC radio also could not provide the full details of RCR information, so air traffic controllers would pass the major parts of runway condition through radio. In terms of timeliness, in order to process a Snowtam, there is a need for sometimes to receive the information and then to process it and to send it, and then when it's received by the airport, by the aircraft operator, they need time to process the information. So it's not as timely as the information promulgated by ATC radio, for instance. And ATIS also is something in the middle because ATIS is being updated on regular basis every 30 minutes or 1 hour, and we need some time to record the message, record the information on ATIS, and ATC radio is for sure more timely. But on the other hand, in terms of controller workload, the Snowtam and ATIS would not make a lot of, or would not make controller workload, but if controllers are supposed to promulgate a lot of information on radio, the controller workload would be high in this case. And also in terms of pilots' workload, when they are handling flight. During the flight, Snowtam will have lower impact because they had received it before and the information was processed. ATIS and ATC radio, since they are being received during the flight, so they would make a bit of more workload compared to a Snowtam. It's not comprehensive analysis. It's not something reference to any material. It's just trying to clarify that each of these categories have pros and cons. So we get into Annex 15 provisions related to a Snowtam. You may remember that ICAO introduced GRF in 2016 with the implementation date of July 2016 and applicability date of 5 November 2020. And the Snowtam provisions was part of the package introduced by ICAO called GRF. In 2018, when Amendment 40 to Annex 15 and the new PANS AIM were introduced, the provisions related to a Snowtam were moved to Doc 166 PANS AIM, so you can find it now in Doc 166. And from this point, we get into the Snowtam provisions and format, which is the main purpose of this presentation. Before get into that, I would like to indicate that this information will be provided based on Doc 166 PANS AIM and also a guidance supplementary to the Doc 166 guidance on the issuance of a Snowtam, which was developed by ICAO Euronet office in collaboration with the EUR states, Eurocontrol, EASA, and ICAO HQ. And you can find it on the ICAO Euronet public website. The first change introduced in the Snowtam provisions was about its definition. You can see the orange color are showing the additions to the Snowtam definition, and the strike-throughs show the removals of the previous definition. You can see the first change is that the Snowtam is given in a standard format, which is referring to the RCR structure, which is coincides with the Snowtam format as well. The second, let's say, main change is introduction of frost as a condition that qualifies for the issuance of a Snowtam. And the third one, in the third line again, you can see water associated with the snow, slush, ice, or frost would be qualified for the issuance of a Snowtam. And here you can see some pictures from frost because it was newly introduced. So frost is deposit of small white ice crystals formed on the ground when temperature falls below freezing. So just for familiarization, although as AIS AIM, we are not going to assess runway condition in person, and we are just disseminating the information, but we need to have some knowledge to some extent about the phenomena. Since there has been question about water, standing water, wet runway, and also it was added to the new Snowtam definition here, I would like to provide some clarification on the wet runway versus the standing water. If water on the runway is 3 millimeters or less, so 3 millimeters is the threshold that we define for wet runways, then it's called wet. And a question raised at this point that is this wet runway associated with the treatment or clearing of a snow, slush, ice, or frost? If the answer is no, the information could be provided by ATIS. It would be sufficient. It means that if it has rained and runway became wet and the depth of water on the runway is 3 millimeters or less, it could be promulgated by ATIS. If the wetness of the runway is associated with the snow, slush, ice, or frost, like it's a consequence of a clearing or treatment of the snow, slush, ice, or frost, then it would be disseminated through a Snowtam. As you can see, a simple example of a wet runway Snowtam on the screen, and also ATIS is always an alternative. You can see here that when runway is just wet, you put runway condition code 555, the first green group of digits, and then wet would be the runway description, condition description. On the other hand, if water on the runway is 4 millimeters or more, it's called standing water. And then a Snowtam must be issued. Also, ATIS is complementary means of dissemination of information, as mentioned before. You can see that when the depth of water exceeds 3 millimeters, it has a lot of impact on the message, on the runway condition, that you can see the second and third part of the runway, the condition code reduced from 5 to 2, which has a lot of meaning in terms of aeroplane performance for aircraft operators. And you can see the last part, wet, standing water, standing water. Some provisions introduced for Snowtam 2020. First of all, units of measurement is metric, millimeters, centimeters, meters, and these units of measurement is not indicated and mentioned in the message. You can see the example on the bottom of the screen. You see that, for example, NR66 is the depth of contaminant, but units of measurement is not indicated. We know 6 refers to millimeters. As of 5 November 2020, the validity of a Snowtam would be 8 hours. If after 8 hours of a previous Snowtam, no Snowtam is issued for a specific airport, it means that there is no more significant phenomena on the runway and runway is completely clear. So after 8 hours, if nothing has been issued, then it means that nothing exists for that runway. If you issue a Snowtam within 8 hours of a previous Snowtam for a specific airport with the location indicator of that airport, it automatically cancel the previous Snowtam and replace that one. So there is no need to put reference to the previous Snowtam serial number, as we do it today as well. It's the same. The last bullet item says that items A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on, which you would see in the Snowtam format, would not anymore be included in the message. We do it today, but later, after 5 November 2020, these letters would not be mentioned in the message itself. So those letters are just for our reference. Chris already mentioned that we have some mandatory information in the Snowtam. These 5 groups of information are the minimum sets of information that should be disseminated by a Snowtam. It means that if a Snowtam is issued, these 5 elements should be included as a minimum. The Snowtam should have the location indicator. Of course, we should know the Snowtam belongs to which airport. And the Snowtam must include also the date and time of assessment, the date and time group. And item C, the lower runway designator for which the report is being provided should be also mentioned. And item D, which is the runway condition code, is the most important element of a Snowtam, or on the other hand, of RCR information. This RWICC, or runway condition code, is linked to aeroplane performance elements, and it has a lot of meaning for the operators to decide to take their decisions for operation. Item G, which is condition description, is mandatory, where runway condition code is from 1 to 5. So it's not needed if runway condition code is 0, which is the worst case scenario. It's most probably no operation anymore. Or runway condition code is 6. So runway is dry. So it's not necessary to provide condition description or contaminant type anymore. But these 5 groups are mandatory items. It doesn't mean that we cannot put additional information. For sure, as much as information that we can provide would be helpful for the operators. And you can see an example underneath with the mandatory items highlighted. We will get into the details of this Snowtam a bit later. So when Snowtam starts, it will have first an abbreviated heading. I will jump directly to the example. You can see on the screen that SW are 2 fixed letters in the beginning of a Snowtam message. It's an abbreviated form of a Snowtam. And Snowtam is already an abbreviation, but it's more abbreviated than it even. And the second and the third and fourth letters, LF, here are the first 2 letters of location indicator of the state concern. In this case, SW shows that it's a Snowtam, and LF shows that it's a Snowtam issued by France, for example. 0149 is the serial number of a Snowtam. And then with a space separator, you will find the location indicator. In this case, LFPG is Paris Charles de Gaulle. And then again, after 1 space, you will find date and time group. 11 is the month, 07 is the day, and 0620 is the time in hours and minutes. Then you move to the second line and put a Snowtam as a fixed word. You can see on at the example. And then again, after a space, you will put the serial number of a Snowtam. Then it moves to the main part of the Snowtam, which is the information part. It has 2 sections. The first section, aeroplane performance section, has 8 items or 8 elements, items A to H. And also the second section is the situational awareness section, items I to T. Aeroplane performance section is the part which is very important for the operators because their elements are related to aeroplane performance, and it would be a criteria for taking the decision for operation on the runway. The second part, situational awareness, is not directly linked to the aeroplane performance, but it will provide additional information to pilots and to airlines to get more situational awareness on the airport. So if I move through the elements, you can see the column highlighted in red shows the item or the item indicator, A, B, C, D, and so on. As mentioned, it will not be reflected in the message. It's just for our reference. And then these M, C, and O letters, they show that this item or element is mandatory or conditional or optional. On the top right, you see a symbol. This symbol shows that after this item, you have to move to the next line to continue with the rest of the message. After location indicator, as you can see also in the example, you should move to the next line to continue your message. Then the arrows show that you continue in the same line with the next item. And then the other symbol on the bottom right, which is a double of the symbol on the top right, shows that after the last item of aeroplane performance section, you have to go to the next line, and then you leave the next line empty, and you have to go to the second line to continue with the situational awareness information. I will show you in an example later. Item A is aerodrome location indicator, LFPG in this example. And then you move to the next line with item B, date and time of assessment. Here it's 12, the month, 04 the day, and 6:38 is the time in hours and minutes. Item C is the lower runway designator. I think these are pretty clear for you, so I will not dig into them in order to save time for more complicated items or new items. Then item D is the most important element in the Snowtam message, runway condition code, to be reported for each runway third. Here is 522. So what's 522? Chris already provided a brief explanation. Runway condition code is linked and was determined through studies by the Friction Task Force with the support of manufacturers, airlines, operators, etc. It's from 6 to 0, and this 6, which is the best condition, to 0, which is the worst condition, is linked to the runway surface contaminant type. Also, in some cases, to the outside temperature, in some cases to the depth of contaminants, and also on the right-hand side, you can see that these were determined based on the friction coefficient, etc. So when it's 6, it means that runway is dry. It's the best condition. Then if there is some frost or runway is wet, or 3 millimeters or less of slush, dry snow, wet snow, it should be reported as 5. So AIS is not the one who actually reports it. AIS will receive it from aerodrome operators, and they have techniques for assessment. It's an assessment. Then 4 is compacted snow when outside temperature is -15 or lower. But when it goes to 3, you can see slippery wet runway, which is the wet runway with degraded braking action, dry snow or wet snow on the top of compacted snow, dry snow and wet snow more than 3 millimeters, and again, compacted snow when temperature is -15 or higher. So it would be more watery and more slippery than category 4, so it should be reported as 3 in terms of runway condition code, and you can see the rest. I will explain it again in another slide in a different way. Then item E is the percentage of coverage. When no information is to be reported in item E, insert NR. So as you may remember, item E is not mandatory. So if there is no information, put NR. Here you can see, if the contaminant coverage is less than 10%, insert NR. If runway condition is dry, or on the other hand, runway condition code is 6 in item D, and also if there is nothing to report, you should put NR as item E. Also, if the contaminant covers runway between 10 to 25%, it would be reported 25. If it's 26 to 50%, it would be reported 50, and so on and so forth. So getting back to the format, item F is the depth of contaminant. Again, if depth values are not available or are not significant to be reported for any reason, if they're not reported, put NR between the slash symbols. Here you can see depth is reported for standing water, slush, wet snow, and dry snow. You know that the standing water is water of 4 millimeters or more. So if it's less than 3 millimeters, it's wet and no depth is being reported, you will just put wet, wet, wet. And in item F, you will put NR, NR, NR. But if water on the runway is 4 millimeters or more, you will put it for standing water. So it would be minimum 4, and then above 4, as assessed and reported through RCR, would be included in the Snowtam. For a slush, wet snow, dry snow, if it's less than 3 millimeters, it's not reported, you will put NR. Still, you will have a slush. with NR, and you may remember that runway condition code for slush, wet snow, and dry snow less than 3 millimeter is different from when it's 3 millimeters or more. The right-hand column significant change will be explained later. Item G is description of the condition or contaminant. This is very interesting. So I'm providing here a table in the other way. I've listed types of contaminants, and then they correspond to which runway condition code. So on the top you can see runway could be dry, and then runway condition code is 6. You can see that frost is reported as 5. And then on the third row, you can see different types of water on the runway. If water on the runway will make runway only wet, it means that it's up to and including 3 millimeters, runway condition code is 5. If it's a slippery wet, which as per definition, it's a wet runway with downgraded or degraded friction coefficient, and as AIS, AIM, we are not assessing it. Airport operators will report it to us, and then runway condition code is 3 for that one. If water exceeds 3 millimeters, it means that if it's 4 or above, then runway condition code is 2. And if water exists on the top of compacted snow, runway condition code is 0. You can see water on the runway could have different and various impacts. It could result in runway condition code 5 if it's only wet, and it could result in runway condition code 0, which is almost no operation, or actually we wouldn't say no operation, it's a decision by operators, aircraft operator, but it makes sense if a pilot decides to wait until runway condition improves. We have 2 types of slush, up to and including 3 millimeters. Runway condition code is 5. More than 3 millimeters, runway condition code is 2. You may remember that a slush is reported for 3 millimeters or above. So if a slush is 3 millimeters, you will report 3 for depth. You will report the slush for runway condition description, and you will report runway condition code 2. Then when it becomes 4, it means more than 3 millimeters. For the first example, runway condition code would be 5. And if the depth is 4 millimeters or more, runway condition code is 2. I hope it was clear. Dry snow, wet snow, if it's up to and including 3 millimeters, runway condition code would be 5. If it's more than 3 millimeters, it means that if it's 4 or more, runway condition code would be 3. If dry snow or wet snow of any depth, it doesn't matter how much, if it exists on the top of compacted snow, the runway condition code would be 3. If this exists of any depth on top of ice, then it would be 0. Again, you can see we could have a snow in the airport with runway condition code 5, which is not bad, or we can have a snow in the airport with runway condition code 0. Then compacted snow, depending on outside temperature, will get a value for runway condition code 4 or 3. You see that when outside temperature is higher, then runway condition code is 3, which represents a worse situation, because probably they determine 3 because compacted snow would be more slippery and more watery when it's in higher temperature, actually higher than -15. Anyway, it was based on studies, and then it will be reported by airport operators to AIS. Also for ice, we have 2 types. Ice will be 1 and wet ice will be 0. Item O, item H is optional in the first part or first section if, as a consequence of clearing or treatment of the runway, you cleaned parts of the width of the runway and the whole width of runway is not available, and the available width of the runway is less than the published one, then this part represents the part of runway which is linked to the runway condition code reported above. It should be reported as item H. Otherwise, you will not put anything. So repeating information in the aeroplane performance calculation section for more than one runway. When a Snowtam is issued for more than one runway and is providing information on more than one runway, item B to H will be repeated, as you can see in the example. Location indicator will remain, but the other three lines are repetition of items B to H for three runways, 08 right, 08 center, and 08 left. And also significant change will be a determinant to continue issuing RCR and by aerodrome operator and Snowtam. As AIS unit, Snowtam office, we issue a new Snowtam once we receive a new RCR from the aerodrome operator, and aerodrome operators must initiate RCR once a significant change occurs on the runway or in the airport, and significant changes are listed here. Any change in runway condition code, reference to item D of Snowtam, any change in the contaminant type, item G, any change in the contaminant coverage or percentage, item E, and any change in the contaminant depth, item F, or any other information that are known to be significant. So this process will be continued. The process of issuing RCR and then dissemination of Snowtam will continue until the runway is no longer contaminated. So there would be nothing on the runway. Now we move to the second section, situational awareness. You can see a complete Snowtam in the example, and then the highlighted part is the situational awareness. You see that between the first section, aeroplane performance section, and the second section, we left one line empty. So let me very briefly introduce the items. The first one is item I, reduce runway length. If, as a consequence of runway condition or treatment or clearing of the runway, like there are snowbanks in a corner of the runway or at the end of the runway, if the runway length is reduced for that reason, this information will be inserted in item I with the runway designator. And if this happens, you need also to issue a separate NOTAM to inform users about the new declared distances, and this information would be linked to the information provided by a NOTAM. Item G is the presence of drifting snow. If drifting snow exists in the airport, you will put drifting snow. Some states and regulatory agencies indicated that, and you will find some information in the ICAO Euronet guidance on Snowtam. They indicated that they might put runway designator, as in large airports, drifting snow may impact some runways, but not all runways. But ICAO requires to put only drifting snow for item G. Item K is the loose sand existence on the runway. If as a consequence of clearing by sand or salt, loose sand remains on the runway, it would be reported in item K together with the runway designator. And if runway was treated chemically, it would be reported in item L with the relevant runway designator. Also, if there is a snowbank on the runway designator, the word snowbank, and then the distance on the right or left of the center line would be provided in item M. If a Snowtam exists on a taxiway, you will put taxiway designator and the word Snowtam. Also, if a Snowtam exists outside of runway, adjacent to the runway, then you will put runway designator and the words adjacent snowbanks. If taxiway or apron condition was assessed poor by the airport assessor in terms of coefficient, contaminant, etc., they will report taxiway poor, and you will put it in the Snowtam as taxiway with its designator and then the word poor, and it goes the same for apron. Which apron? And then the word poor. The last two items are measured friction coefficient, item S, which is not anymore required by ICAO, PANS AIM, and also PANS Aerodrome, but it's kept here for those states who would like to report braking action or friction coefficient, and they must have their own national requirement and national procedures. Those indicators that existed before 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will not exist anymore in ICAO provisions, but item S, if it's not there, you will not report it. Then item T is the plain language remarks. If you have any additional information, you will put it in item T. And here there are some syntax information on the Snowtam situational awareness section. Elements in the situational awareness section ends with a full stop. And when there is no information for each and any item in the situational awareness section, or even if there is no information on the whole part, you will just leave it empty. So there is no need to put anything there. And after the aeroplane performance section, you have to leave one line empty and then start situational awareness section if information exists. And I will show you a complete example later. Repeating information in the situational awareness section. If you have, for instance, a snowbank on different runways or on several taxiways, how this should be repeated? The most favorable option is that you go by order, alphabetical order of items. Like if you reach to item J or item K or whatever, which is a snowbank on runway, then you have to put runway 09 right snowbank, runway 09 left snowbank, runway 09 center snowbank, etc. The other option, which is option 2, is that you report everything for runway 09 left, and then you report everything for runway 09 right, and the same for taxiways, but it's not recommended. The recommended option is to go through the alphabetical order. In the end, there is a note. Since there is no mandate on this, also there would be different formats for example, apron designators in different airports, or taxiway designator, etc. Actually, taxiway designator has a format in ICAO, but airport designator, for instance, doesn't have a format. Or also, plain language item T can get different values. So your systems in AIS Snowtam office should have, to some extent, some flexibilities to accept anything included in the situational awareness section. It's not as rigid and defined as aeroplane performance section in some items. So a complete example of a Snowtam, this is the last part. You can see on the top, the first two lines are the general items included in any ATS message. The first line is the priority for this example, or for a Snowtam priority is always GG, and then the addresses. The second line is the originator line, the day and time of the origination of this message, and also the originator here is Bordeaux Snowtam office. This is general in all ATS messages, and from here a Snowtam message is commencing. This is the abbreviated heading and the Snowtam serial number as explained before. Item A, location indicator as explained before, and then you will go to the next line. You will put item B, items B to H, and if it's repeated for different runways, they would go to next lines. Then you will leave one line empty and you will start information of the situational awareness section. In the end, I'd like to thank you for your attention to this presentation. The webinar is not yet finished. It's just thank you for this presentation. And this information again was provided from PAN's AIM and the guidance of the issuance of a Snowtam, which includes much more details than provided in this presentation. You can download it from the ICAO Euronet public website, and you can provide any comments, observations, or suggestions for its improvement to the ICAO Euronet office. So thank you very much.